broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for signing on time. We're going to give it a couple more minutes for a few more folks to get on, and we will be getting started with our webinar tonight on databasing and voter education. Folks who just signed on, we're going to wait a couple more minutes for folks to sign on, but we're getting started shortly. Thank you again for being here on time. We're just going to give it one more minute for folks to sign on and we'll get started. But thank you again for signing on time. Alrighty, y'all. Thank you for joining us tonight on our Youth and College Division NAACP webinar on databasing and voter education. My name is Wisdom Cole. I am the Youth and College National Organizing Manager. Essentially what that means is that I'm in charge of all organizing and trainings and campaigns for our Youth and College Division. Tonight we're going to be talking about databasing and voter education. And so what we're going to go over real quickly is we're going to go over just a recap some voter registration tools. We're going to talk about the reg, pledge, and databasing process. And through that, we'll talk about databasing 101. So what does it mean for us to start databasing the votes, the voter registration cards that we are getting, and I'll talk about this pledge card process and how to work that, and then we will talk about some voter education tools, look over some examples, and then talk about voter contact. So if you have any questions, please say that towards the end. At the bottom of the webinar application, there is a question toolbox, and so you can drop a question anytime throughout the webinar. In addition, there are 5 handouts that are available on the webinar application as well. If you click on the handouts, there is a handout about tabling, a handout about class reps, a handout about door knocking. There's also an example of a pledge card in there as well. And so feel free to download those and share those with people in your network, people that are in your units, but these are tools that you can use to support your efforts on the ground. Again, for the most up-to-date information about what's going on with the NAACP Youth and College Division, definitely follow us on our Instagram page at NAACP_YC. So a real quick recap of our goals for 2018 in our Level Up and NAACP campaign. One, we want to increase voter registration for folks who are 18 to 25 who are people of color, right? Because they tend to be the people who are considered low propensity voters. Low propensity voters means that people who don't tend to turn out to vote. So these are people who are 18 to 25 and people of color. So we want to make sure we're turning all those people out. Our second goal is to begin to base build, right? So this is kind of a long-term goal, but also is very important in terms of our voter turnout campaign. We want to increase the amount of members that we have within our NAACP units, but also increase the amount of people who are turning out to vote this midterm election, because this will be very informative for us. And last but not least, we want to educate and turn out all people of color in your community. So tonight's webinar will mainly be focusing on the third one, educating and turning out people of color in your community. Later on in our webinar series, we'll be talking more about mobilization and the Get Out the Vote efforts. And so definitely stay tuned for those upcoming webinars. So we have 37 days until the 2018 midterm election. So that means that we are on the ground and we are pushing. We want to make sure that we are supporting you in all efforts to do voter registration, to do mobilization, to do education. And so anytime you have questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. At the end, I'll show you our youth and college email where you can contact us about any issues that you're having on the ground, as well as any ways we can support you through resources. And so we want to make sure that in these 37 days that we're being effective, that we are registering as many people as we can to vote, and then that we're really thinking about how we are mobilizing those people to actually turn out to the polls on November 6th, right? I think that oftentimes, even if you ask a room of people, when are the midterm elections? A lot of people don't know. So part of the voter education efforts is making sure people know when the elections are, where to turn out to, but we'll talk about that as we go through our webinar tonight. So some highlights from National Voter Registration Day, which was this past Tuesday. All over the country, there are students, staff, advisors, just many organizations who are working around voter registration, making sure that people in their units are registered to vote, the people on their campus are registered to vote, the people in their community are registered to vote. People were putting out different education guides, and so I just want to continually, increase and push people to think of creative ways to do voter registration. Folks have done it at football games. They've done it at basketball games. They've done it at think about places where people in your community tend to congregate or tend to come out to already, and how can you add voter registration to that, right? I know a lot of people think about recreating the wheel and doing different types of voter registration events on campus or voter registration drives, which is also fine. But also, I want to encourage y'all to think creatively about this, right? I've heard that different communities have different types of events that support gathering. Maybe there's a cookout event that people turn out to. Maybe there is some kind of street fair that people come to. If there's already events that are set up where people are doing or where people are doing community events or community gathering, if you can contact those organizers and say, hey, how can we add to this by doing some voter registration and contacting people and talking with people in the community, this is a great way to not put too much work on your hands, but actually just continue to add to it. So thinking about voter registration and these last couple of weeks, for a lot of states, voter registration will be ending on October 9th. So you want to think about, one, what are the voter registration deadlines for your state? Right, and we'll talk about it a little bit later when we talk about voter education. But thinking that only 15 states in the District of Columbia have same-day voter registration, and so being aware and thinking about your state and thinking about how can we work in my state to be the most efficient around voter registration, and that we are working around the clock in this current state of time to get as many people registered to vote, so that when we are doing our voter education efforts, that we are contacting the appropriate people. So a really quick way, something that we launched on Voter Registration Day, was thinking about, wondering if you're actually registered to vote, right? It never hurts to check your registration status. And so At the bottom, there's a link. There's a bit link called bit.ly/NAACPYC_vote, where one, you can check your registration status, right? So I want you all to encourage members, encourage people in your community that, like, it doesn't hurt to check your registration status. It doesn't hurt to make sure that you are, even people who say they're registered to vote, it doesn't hurt to do that. And so people can check their registration status. And if they're not registered to vote at their current location, they can update their status right there on the spot on the application. From there, they can register to vote if they're not registered to vote, and then they can also share this link with friends. And so I want to encourage y'all to use this link, right, to be a little bit more modern about how we're registering people to vote. I know a lot of people use paper and pen, and I know depending on your community, it might look differently. But I want to encourage you to use this link to get as many people to register to vote, and even do it yourself to say, hey, is my status updated, and how can I encourage people to check their status, right? It's very important to check our status very frequently. So right there on the bottom, I'm going to give y'all a second just to get that link down. In addition, this presentation will be sent out tomorrow to everybody who is on this webinar. And this will be also resources that will be available on our website later on. But definitely use this website to increase the amount of people who are actually turning out to vote as well and registering to vote. So a quick, just a refresher on how to put on a voter registration drive. Usually, I'm thinking about a week or 2 weeks in advance for a voter registration drive. And so I want to make sure that I have a place, date, time of a registration event. Again, like I said earlier, you want to connect with any event organizers to get permission, right? You don't want to just show up and they're saying, you can't table here, you can't do work here. This is not going to support the efforts that we're doing. So make sure you get permission from event organizers ahead of time as soon as possible. You want to build your team leadership. So who are the people who are the point people in this effort to do voter registration drive? If you're also doing voter education, who's in charge of doing voter education? You just want to make sure you know what's happening during your event. You want to make sure that you get voter registration forms. Every day I get emails asking me, where do I get voter registration forms, right? And so simple fact of that is that you can download online, right? So one, you can use our link to do voter registration, but two, you can also download forms online. You can go to your local board of elections or county office. They're readily usually available at the library, the DMV, and the U.S. Post Office. And so even on your campus, or at your school, you can check to see if they're at the library. If you're close to a DMV or a post office, those are places where you can also get voter registration forms from as well. And so you want to make sure you're ready ahead of time so that you can have the most successful event possible. You want to make sure you have supplies. You want to have clipboards. You want to have pens. You want to make sure you have a table. If you have any stickers, buttons, T-shirts, any kind of swag that will kind of increase people to come to your table and make sure that they are registering to vote or talking to you. Maybe you have some candy that you're giving away to people. So you want to have some kind of way to draw attention to people for them to come to your table. Again, I want to remind folks that if you get 500 voter registration forms, right? So if you have documented 500 newly voter registration people who are newly registered to vote, we will give you a youth in college vote box, which includes clipboards, pens, stickers, buttons, and T-shirts. And so that's something that we're also running. As soon as you do that, definitely contact us, verify it, and we will send you a youth in college vote box, which you can use for further voter registration as well as voter education events. You want to publicize your event. So how are you publicizing it on Instagram? How are you putting it up on your Twitter account? If you have Facebook, how are you publicizing your Facebook? Maybe you're going around campus and you're putting flyers on bus stops. You're passing out flyers to people in their classes after class, right? You want to publicize your event so people know when it's happening and how to get there and what's happening. You want to train your volunteers before you have your voter registration drive. So people who are showing up, either you're having a quick little phone call or maybe you're meeting an hour before just to go over what's happening, right? If there's a script that you're going to give people a script. You want to make sure that people are trained and ready to go on the ground. And usually this happens from somebody who is more experienced, who maybe have done this before, but you want to have a person in charge of training your volunteers who are showing up to help you so that they're not just sitting behind the table, but they're actually engaging with the community. Too often I've seen people have voter registration drives and they're like, we had nobody registered to vote. Well, what did you do? It's like, well, we kind of sat behind the table and waited for people to come talk to us. No, 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 no. It's very, very important that when you're doing a voter registration drive, that you are moving around the table, that you're talking to people, and that you are engaging with them. And shortly, I'll be talking about a basic script that you can use when you are doing voter registration on the ground as well as over the phone. Next, you want to execute. You want to make sure that people are registering to vote and that people who are already registered to vote are pledging to vote, right? And this is very important because this is going to help us with our mobilization numbers and thinking about how many people are actually mobilizing and actually turning out to the polls on November 6th. Last but not least, I want to encourage y'all to make sure that you are databasing, right? That you're taking the information that you're getting from folks who are registered, that you're taking the information that you're getting from folks who are pledging to vote, and you're making sure that you're databasing those voters, right? This is going to be very, very important when we talk about voter contact and how you make sure that people who are registered to vote or people who say that they're already registered to vote actually turn out on November 6th, right? Some people, it doesn't really matter if you're registering 1,000 people, but only 2 people actually turn out to vote on November 6th. And so it's a very meticulous process of making sure that people are getting registered to vote and then making sure that they're educated around the vote and then making sure that 1,000 people that you get to register actually turn out on November 6th. Again, if there's any questions that you have, definitely feel free to drop it in the question box. And when we get to our question and answer portion, I will go over that. So a really quick script that you can use. This is a basic script that I use often, all the time. But when you're talking to people, you're introducing yourself, and then right away you're kind of asking them, "Are you registered to vote?" If they're not registered, then you want to make sure that you're registering them on the spot. If they say yes, but like, "Oh, I'm not sure," I might be registered back home, but not on my current campus, or I don't know if my address is updated. You want to re-register them right away because re-registering them will ensure that they also are able to vote. If they say yes, but they haven't gotten any kind of confirmation, again, you want to re-register them. It doesn't hurt, right? Registering and changing your status up until the very last day is not going to hurt you when it comes to actually turning people out to vote for this election season. And then last but not least, if people are saying yes, they're all good, you want to get them to do a voter pledge card, right? And I'll talk about what a voter pledge card looks. There's an example in our handouts as well that you can download and that you can use. And so definitely get people to pledge to vote, even if they're all good on the registration side. Another example, right? If you do voter registration over the phone, so another system that you can see on our handouts is phone banking, right? So say you decide to do some phone banking and you're talking to people over the phone, you have a list of people, and you're calling them and they're saying, "No, I'm not registered to vote." You want to indicate what are upcoming events, what are locations where they can register, where are places they can go. Maybe you're over the phone and you can text them right away. You can text them the link that we had at the beginning of the presentation so they can register right there on the spot, right? Maybe there's ways on your Instagram page or your Twitter account or your Facebook where you can, and I want to encourage people, put that link out and get people to register to vote and see how many people you can actually get to use the link and document that, right? Maybe they can take a screenshot on their phone or a screenshot on their laptop saying that they have completed their voter registration, and maybe there's some kind of event that you have. Maybe some people have like, oh, if you have a snapshot of your voter registration, you can come to this party that we're having. Maybe if you have a snapshot of this voter registration, you can come to this pizza party that we're having, or an ice cream party, or whatever kind of event that's going to be that's going to get people to engage with you. Definitely, you want to be creative about this. Again, right? If they're not registered at their current address, re-register them. If they don't have a confirmation, re-register them. And another thing that we've been using is for voter pledges is that people can text NAACP YC to 40649 to pledge to vote as well. And by texting this number, what happens is that you can register to vote, you can pledge to vote there. And what will happen is that throughout the voter campaign, you will be getting updates about places where you can go vote, about any events that are happening in the community, the events that are happening nationwide. And so this is a really great way for folks to stay in touch about what's happening nationwide. I text this number and I get updates every day about what's happening in the NAACP that I might not be aware of, but now that I'm aware of because I have this on my phone and it's updating me frequently throughout the week. The next thing I want to encourage y'all to think about is really, really setting canvassing goals, right? And so What it means to canvas is it means that you are going in high traffic areas where there's a lot of people, and you are doing things such as tabling, that you're doing class reps, or you're doing door knocking, um, all different things, right, that are available in the handouts below, that gives you kind of like a quick rundown on how to do those at different events. But you want to make sure you're keeping goals and you're actually tracking what you're doing. So how many registration cards are you getting from people? How many pledge cards have you gotten in a week? How many volunteers have you recruited to do voter registration? Right? How many hours have you tabled? How many class reps have you given? How many how many door knocking routines have you gone through, or door knocking routes have you actually made? And so you want to track this, right? And this is very important to track it. So you're actually having goals that you're setting, and that you're actually going to be able to meet these goals when it comes down to November 6th election. And so again, I want to encourage you to make sure that you are tracking your progress throughout the campaign, right? And this allows you to be reflective at the end in terms of what went really well and what are areas where we can improve on for next time, right? And this is just a basic thing to think about as you run any type of campaign on your campus. So really quickly, a reminder, some voter registration tools and events that people have been doing all across the country. Folks have been doing things such as Souls to the Polls, Who's Invited to the Cookout, Mass Incarceration and Drug War Town Hall, which is just a way to educate people to come to come learn about the vote, as well as to get registered to vote. People have been doing. I've been seeing some awesome things around freshman and transfer move-in days. I know in Mississippi at Russ College, folks at the NAACP there actually got all their freshman class to register to vote at a freshman assembly. And so I think it's really, really important to think about what are creative ways where you can get a mass amount of people to register to vote all at the same time. And so for folks who are at universities, I want to challenge you and encourage you to think about ways you can get all of your freshmen to register to vote, right? These are people who are new to campus, who are newly turning 18, or who are newly eligible to register to vote. And so how can you get them, everybody who is a freshman, to register? Transfers, people who are maybe not new, or who are new to the community, how are ways you can maybe talk to them? Maybe you can go visit them at their dorms, do a dorm storm, and engage with them around the voting process and getting them to register to vote. Maybe you're having an NAACP interest meeting where you are having folks who are interested in being part of the NAACP uh, come through, learn about the NAACP, and also register to vote, right? And like I talked about earlier, having football games, mock debates, pledges, and parties, right? These are all really, really efficient ways to do this. And again, like, be creative with it. Think about, you know your campus, you know your school the best, you know your school better than anybody else. So making sure that you are doing things that are going to actually get people, right? Maybe something that works for one campus works for them, but it doesn't work for you. So think about what are creative ways in which you can do this. Real quickly, I want to highlight this part of building coalitions, right? We want to think about how are we dividing the labor up, right? If there's other people who are doing work that is similar to us, right? Other organizations, maybe other students of color, other, organizations that are interested around getting people engaged in the civic process. How can we work with them to build coalitions so that we divide up the work, divide up the labor, so that we're not just doing stuff by ourselves? So to highlight, the main point of this webinar tonight is we want to talk about the registering, pledging, and databasing process, right? So on the left, you see a sample voter registration form, right? So you want to make sure that people are filling this out appropriately, properly, and making sure that you can, and you want to also, I want to encourage you all to collect these voter registration forms, and you actually submit them to the County Board of Elections so that folks aren't losing it along the way, right? So get them to register right there on the spot, and then make sure you have a designated volunteer who's going to turn those in. The next part of that, right, is for people who have registered to vote, getting them to also sign this pledge, right? And so what this pledge does, it allows us to begin to database the information that we need to do voter education and voter contact, right? So you see on this pledge card right here in the middle that we're asking people for their name, for their phone number, for their email, for their address as well, right? And so these are things that you can begin to put into your database system so that you can contact them along the way, right? And so when you're databasing these votes, right, and depending on your campus, depending on where you live, right, you might want to also get their year, their major. But the key things are, getting their name, getting their email address, getting their phone number, getting their address. And then I'm going to show you an example in a second. but you want to get, what is the registration status? Maybe along the way they're like, oh, I want to register, but I'm too busy right now. I want to register later, but I'll take a pledge. So you're writing down the information so people are pledging to vote, but you're going to make sure you're reminding them later maybe about registration. And so I'll show you an example, as well as thinking about, how many times have you contacted them, right? If you think about contact as almost like this stereo surround system of how do I contact people, um, 5 times at minimum, so that they know about what's going on in the voter turnout process, right? Oftentimes it takes 5 to 8 times for people to actually get a message and actually internalize it and actually turn out to vote. And so you should be thinking about the 5 times in which you can contact somebody along your voter turnout campaign process and what that looks like. And I'll give you some examples in terms of how many times to contact people and what each contact looks like. But we really want to make sure that we're doing this registering, that we're pledging, and that we're databasing. So what a campus voter database looks like. So what you see on the left-hand side is that I have my student names, right? So I'm recording my student names. I'm putting out who are the students that I'm contacting, the people that I'm talking to, and I'm recording the names. Depending on your campus or depending on the information that you want to get, you're also getting their year, you're getting their major. You're putting that down on the form as well. You're getting their email address, right, so that you can easily send out a mass email list. You're getting their phone number so that in case you are doing phone banking, that you have their phone number readily available. You can call them. You have your address. Maybe you're stuffing some envelopes with some voter information, or you're putting some voter guides together. You can make sure you're sending it to the right place. And then the most important part is making sure that what is their registration status? Are they registered to vote? For student one, right, I have this. I have that they are. I say yes. For student two, I have them. They say yes as well. For student three, they said no, right? They're not registered to vote, and I didn't get them to register at my event, and so I know that this person, I have their information, but I know that they're not registered to vote, and so I need to do all I can within the time that I have, right, within the 2 weeks, to make sure that this person is registered to vote. Maybe if somebody says they're registered, but they don't have a confirmation, right, and they haven't got a confirmation yet for whatever reason, and so writing whatever status that they're at in terms of their registration process. You want to write, also check if they have pledged to vote as well, right? So what is their pledge status? Have they agreed to pledge to vote, right? Maybe they didn't agree to pledge to vote, and you're working to agree to get them to a pledge. Like maybe you need to get them to come to a couple more events so that they can actually pledge to vote. You want to have that pledge status as well. And then, like I said earlier, you want to make sure you're having how many times you've contacted them and in what way you contacted them, right? And so right here, I have contact one, but after contact one, you have contact two, contact three, contact four, contact five, maybe even contact six, seven, and eight, right? Depending on the amount of work and your capacity to do that, maybe you're contacting them up to 8 times to make sure that they turn out on November 6th. And so when you're writing your contact, I want you to write in what ways did you contact them? Was it by phone? Was it a tabling event? Did you actually meet them at their dorm or their place of residence and actually do some door knocking? Did you do a phone bank? Did they come to an event, right? Make sure you're documenting that. So like when you're having these different events, making sure that you're having a sign-in sheet where people are writing their name, they're writing their email address, they're writing their phone number down, any information that you're collecting at the event, and you're making sure that they are being databased. And so what that looks like for a lot of people is maybe having like a digital download Friday. So maybe you had 5 different events throughout the week. You tabled every day. You did some door knocking. You did some phone banking. On Friday, you're getting together with all your volunteers and you're putting together all your lists and saying, okay, these are the lists of people that we have. Is their email correct? Is their phone number correct? Is their address correct? Have I in this week span of time, did I register these people to vote? In this week span of time, did they pledge to vote? In this week span of time, how many times did I contact them? Did I contact them by phone? Did I do a tabling event with them? Did they come out to our NAACP interest event? Did they come out to our voter education event? Right? You're getting all those things down and you're documenting how many times you've contacted them. Because if you're reaching 5 contacts, right, within a certain period of time, there's a pretty good chance that this person is going to turn out to vote on November 6th. And so there's different ways that people have done it. Digital Download Friday works. People have like Technology Tuesday, where they're having people that are really good with technology actually go into their Excel sheet and actually database their voters, right? And so I want to encourage you, right, when you're doing these pledge cards, that you're saving these pledge cards, you're collecting them. Maybe you're having a point of contact, right? So people are getting people to do pledge cards. You have a volunteer who's your point person that is collecting all the pledge cards and saving them so that when you do your digital download Friday or you do your databasing event, that you are actually accurately databasing the information that you have, and constantly rechecking to see in what way you've done contact, right? And so I want to emphasize the databasing process because I think it's very, very important that we know who we're reaching and who we're talking to, right? Another way that I've talked to people about doing is that maybe you talk to your campus housing coordinators, or you talk to your residential life, or you talk to your dean of students, and if maybe there's a way you can get uh, all the names of students who live in a certain dorm or who live in a certain housing area, or maybe you go to your resource center and you're talking to folks at a resource center and you're seeing if there are a way you can get a record of all the students of color on campus, right? So you can already have the information, and then you can begin to think about, okay, are they registering? Are they pledging? And in what way have I contacted these students, right? And so these are all ways that you can think about it in different ways and making sure that you are making the work easier for yourself. Maybe there's other organizations that also have lists that they're working off of that you can also implement for your database as well. So you can check off to see if they're registered, if they pledged, and in what ways you've done contact with them. Again, if you have any questions about voter contact databasing, definitely feel free to drop that below in the question box, and we'll talk about that when we get to the question and answer section. So what voter contact looks like, right? So the first time you're contacting somebody, you want to begin to identify who they are, and you want to register them. And so maybe you got them to sign a voter pledge card, that you collected their contact information and you entered it into your database, right? So that's the first time you contacted them. The second time you're contacting them, maybe you're verifying them through their registration. So maybe they registered, but maybe they didn't get any confirmation, right? So you want to be like, hey, I registered you to vote. I want to make sure that you got your registration confirmation, and it's the second time you're engaging with them. Maybe you're confirming where their poll location is, right? So a lot of times people are registered to vote, but they don't know where to go vote, right? So you want to be, okay, where's your registration place, or where's your polling place on campus, so you know the address, the exact place you need to go. So you're making the process easier for them along the way. You want to also, this also could be distributing any kind of voter guide or sample ballots, right? We'll talk about that in a second in terms of what voter education looks like. But this is a perfect opportunity to give them information about the vote so that they are more aware of the vote and what's happening, and that they can actually participate as an informed voter, right? Maybe you're inviting them to an event where you're having people talk about issues and having candidates actually speak to potential voters. And so this is also, this could be the second contact that you're having with them. The third contact, maybe you're inviting students to a forum, a debate, a movie, event, something where they're engaging with other voters, and that they're becoming more informed together and seeing what's happening nationwide or what's happening on your campus, right? If possible, maybe you're saying, hey, we're going to be offering rides to the polls and letting people know that this is going to be a community process. So maybe on November 6th, you're having a party on campus, or you're having a cookout on campus, or you're having some kind of event where people are going to be encouraged to be available and come to. And then from that event, they're going to be going to the polls together. So maybe they're getting an Uber ride together, or maybe they're walking there together. But just really encouraging people to do this together as a process where folks are engaging in this in the election season as a community event, right? So you want to do all the things you can do as possible to encourage people to actually show out. The fourth time you're contacting them, you're confirming that students are prepared to vote and they know what's on the ballot. They know where their polling place is. You're just confirming with them, like, hey, you're going to actually turn out to vote on November 6th. And then on the fifth time, that is actually on election day. So election day, we want to make sure that we are visible, that we are present, and that we are calling any last minute people that maybe you contacted somebody 3 times or 2 times or only 1 time, right? Those are people that you want to make sure you're either calling or you're knocking on their door or doing something where you're getting them to actually turn out on that day, right? Oftentimes, again, like people of color, people who are 18 to 25 are people who don't show out to the polls the most, because sometimes we don't feel like we're represented. Sometimes we feel like we're not informed. Sometimes we feel like this vote doesn't matter. But the more and more education we give people, the more and more we contact them, the more and more we discuss with them and make voting a simpler process, or a process where they feel more informed or feel more empowered, the more times we'll guarantee them to show out to vote. And so the fifth time is on election day. You're calling your database, you're emailing your database, you're verifying that students have voted, right? You're saying, hey, did you turn out today? how is the voting process, you're contacting them to make sure that they did that, right? So even back to this database, right? Maybe you add another section at the end that says, did they turn out to vote, right? And you put a check mark of how many people in your database actually turn out to vote versus how many people in your database didn't. And that's going to be very informative for you and for us to actually see where did our efforts actually turn out and where did our efforts actually fall flat. So again, if you have any questions about voter contact or these 5 steps of voter contact, definitely feel free to drop a question and I will talk about this a little bit more at the end. So voter education tools. So there are 2 main types of ways in which you can do voter education, right? And voter education essentially means providing citizens of a democracy with basic information about participating in elections, right? So this is the core part of the voter turnout campaign, right? So right now, as we're wrapping up the voter registration thing, right? And I'm not telling people to stop doing voter registration, but I'm encouraging people to start encouraging. I'm starting encouraging people about how do we think about transitioning into voter education and what voter education events that we're going to be having in the next couple of weeks so people are informed and are empowered, right? So as a nonprofit, what we do is that we do nonpartisan voter education. So that means we're not supporting one side or the other. We're giving both sides opportunities to speak, as well as we're educating people about everything that is on the vote, right? And the more informed people are, the more opportunity they have to make informed decisions, right? So there are 2 types of voter education that we can do, right? One is the when, the where, and the how of voting, right? So you're giving people the opportunity to know the when, to know the where, to know the how of the voting process. The second is letting people know what's actually on the ballot, right? So people are familiar with the ballot and actually know what it looks like and are prepared to go into the voting process informed as possible. So the when, where, and how voting. So on your campus, you want to begin to help people stay informed about actually when the election is, where the election is, and how they vote, right? So again, like I said earlier, a lot of people don't even know that November 6th is the election day, right? And so you want to use any kind of communication, use any videos, use any events or forums to announce the days of election, let people know when the early voting period is, let people know where their polling place is, let people know what are the voter registration deadlines, and how to register online, right? And so these are things of giving people information about the actual like mechanics of voting, the when, the where, the how, right? These are kind of basic things, but these are things that a lot of people don't actually know. And so it's very, very important that we're doing these things to increase the amount of people who are actually turning out to vote. Maybe you're making a short video with interviews from people on your campus or people that you know who are very popular, who will actually get people to turn out to vote and be informed about the actual thing, right? It's simple as saying, hey, election day is on November 6th. Make sure you turn out to vote. Or, hey, the last day to register to vote is October 9th. And so you're making sure that you are registered to vote by this date, right? Something simple that you can put out. So a quick example that we've been doing with the NAACP is something called the Power of Five. And I'm actually going to show this Power of Five video.
I've got 5. I've got 5. And I've got 5 too.
So do I.
What? $5? I don't get paid till Friday.
What? No, we're not talking about money. We're talking about moving people to the polls for elections.
And I'm talking about registering 5 people to vote. And I'm volunteering 5 days between now and election day.
And I'm canvassing for 5 days.
Okay, well then I'll text 5 friends and remind them to vote.
Good, because election day is coming up super fast.
And the time for action is now. Claim your power.
Use your networks.
Use your phones.
You need to go vote.
We all need to go vote. On November 6th, use your power.
Your power of 5.
Text POWER to 40649 to get involved.
Right. So you see right there, it's a video that's very clear about the power of 5, the power of voting, why it's important to vote, and you're encouraging people to actually turn out to vote, but you're also encouraging people to bring people along with them in the voting process, right? So this is a way in which you can give a short, PSA about voting and why it's very important to turn out to vote, as well as ways that people can get involved in the voting process more efficiently, as well as being connected to a community. This weekend, I had the privilege, to work with some leaders as well And I think we recorded our own little video. Let me see if I can get it to play. So it's not playing right now, but again, this is another example of students coming together and just encouraging people to do, to use their power, to use the power of five, and taking 5 people to the polls or getting 5 people to register to vote, right? Making the voting process a community effort. So the next type of event that you can have that is around voter education is educating people about what's on the ballot, right? So you want to make sure that people know what is actually on the ballot, and the way that we do this is through nonpartisan voter education guides or giving sample ballots so people are familiar with what the ballot looks like. So if you look right here in the middle on our naacp.org/resources/state voter guides, we actually have resource guides for every single state, right? So you can go there, you can search up your state, and it will give you information around what's on the vote. And I'll actually give you an example of what one looks like in Virginia. But you want to make sure that you have this available for folks. Maybe you're creating your own for your campus. Maybe there's something that's going to be particularly affecting your area or your county, but you want to be thinking about how do you make a nonpartisan voter education guide or access a nonpartisan voter education guide. And I'll give you a sample of what that looks like in a minute. Maybe you're having activities where you're having candidates come, or you're having candidate forums, or you're having candidate questionnaires, or any kind of way in which people are getting FaceTime or getting connected with candidates who are actually on the ballot. You want to do that as well, but I want you to encourage you to be careful that you're being neutral and that you are equally representing people, right? And so you want to make sure you're not leaning to one side or the other particularly, but you're giving people the opportunity to be aware of the information. Because as a nonprofit, we are nonpartisan, and so we're not necessarily choosing one person or the other, but we're encouraging people to engage in the civic process so that they are more informed and that they make the right decision for their community. So what a voter education guide looks like, right? So here you see the voter education guide for Virginia. So what this has is it has what are the voter ID requirements, right? So what are things that are needed to actually vote in person, right? So you can't just show up to vote without your license, but maybe you don't have a license, so maybe you have a passport, maybe you have an employee, maybe you don't have a license either, so you have an employee issue ID, right? So you need some type of ID. Maybe you need a student ID issued by a Virginia college or university, right? So on the ID guides, you want to make sure that people know what type of ID they need to actually show up and vote, right? It also has registration deadlines, right? So in Virginia, right, unlike other states, people must be registered to vote by Monday, October 15th, right? So you have what are the deadlines for voter registration in your state? You have the requirements to vote, right? So you have to be a U.S. citizen. You have to be a resident of Virginia. You have to be at least 17 years old or 18-year-old by election day, right? A lot of these basic things, right? A lot of folks ask questions about, well, what if people have been incarcerated or they have a felony or things like that, right? And all these things are very unique to each state. Each state has their own laws or regulations or requirements around this. And so it's very, very important that you know what is particular to your state. Like I try not to say general sweeping statements about the country because each state has their own laws, particularly around folks who are incarcerated, around folks who have felonies. And so it has information around that as well. It has early voting dates, right? If you want to vote early, right, which you want to start encouraging people to do. And we'll talk about that later in our webinars to come about how do we encourage people to actually do early voting, because the more people we get to do early voting, the more people we actually can get to turn out to vote. But also doing absentee ballots as well. And so all this information should be included in your voter guides. And I think it's very important that you think about what are unique ways that maybe you can tweak it for your campus, tweak it for your students, making sure that people are the most informed as possible. So thinking about what's coming up next in our webinar series. So next Sunday, we'll actually be talking about the VAN system and talking about how do we actually database people. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about databasing and talking about what our professional databases look like. On Wednesday, October 10th, we'll be having a Region 2 specific webinar. So if folks who are in Region 2, so folks in the New York area, where we're talking more about voter registration to voter education and looking at some samples that are actually happening in the Region 2 area to make sure that people are well informed about good examples of how to do voter education. Sunday, October 14th, we'll be doing voter contact and early voting. So we're talking a little bit more about the nitty gritty of what does voter contact look like and how that exists and how do we encourage people to actually turn out for early voting periods. Then on Wednesday, October 17th, we'll be doing Region 1, the California area, Hawaii, Nevada, all that good West Coast area. We'll be talking about voter mobilization and direct contact training. Then on Sunday, October 21st, I want to highly, highly, highly encourage folks to be on this national webinar because we'll be talking about GOTV. GOTV stands for Get Out the Vote, right? And the Get Out the Vote effort is a very, very crucial effort that is necessary. GOTV is the weekend right before election. So that's that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And we'll be talking about tools and tactics. And that should actually be a very exciting webinar to be a part of. And so definitely encourage people in your unit, people in your area to be on for that. We might have some special guest speakers on that. So, you never know. Stay tuned. On October 24th, we'll be having a Region 4 webinar where we'll be talking about mobilization and direct contact training as well. And so folks who are in Region 4, Kansas, Iowa, definitely turn out on that time. There's links right there for you to register ahead of time. And then on Sunday, October 28th, we'll be having our final call to action where we're having another nationwide webinar where we're going to be trying to get as many people as possible to be on our webinar. So definitely encourage your friends, encourage your advisors, encourage other students to be on this. We'll definitely be having some more exciting speakers on this webinar. And so it's going to be our last push to really encourage people to do GOTV to make sure that people are turning out to vote, that people are mobilizing people as best as possible. And then right after elections, right? So elections is on November 6th. On Wednesday, November 7th, we'll be doing kind of a debrief, looking at the electoral results and talking about what worked the best, what were some of the best practices we did, what are some places that did really great jobs that we want to highlight and we want to uplift. And so definitely stay tuned for all of that. Again, I want to encourage you to keep doing voter registration. We're actually doing a voter registration competition. And so for folks who actually get the most amount of people registered to vote in this time period, we will actually be giving Letterman jackets to the e-boards of your NAACP units. And then there are also second and third place prizes as well. So again, you want to be registering people to vote and you want to be databasing those people. And so it's not enough just to register them and just do registration, but you're making sure that you're documenting and databasing the amount of people that you are actually getting registered to vote and being able to verify that to us so we can give you your prize. So that is the end of the presentation, the end of the webinar for tonight. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to email youthandcollege@naacpnet.org, and we will get back to you. Like I said earlier, this presentation will be emailed out tomorrow along with a short survey so we can continue to improve our webinar service and improve what we're doing here. This is our 7th webinar out of 15, and so we want to continually get better and make sure that we are supporting y'all in the best way possible. So right now I'm going to look into our question box and see if there are questions that folks are asking about. So someone said, ask high school principals to register students in their government classes. So I think that's a really great strategy, and that's a really great way to think about stuff. I think this weekend I actually talked with some students about, people were asking, what are ways that we can make it mandatory for folks, or not necessarily mandatory, but what are ways we can increase participation, right? So maybe you've been doing some voter registration already and you're not getting a lot of people to come to your tabling events. Not a lot of people are turning out to your voter registration events. Maybe people aren't coming to different things that you're having. And so a really great way is to incentivize, right? So maybe you can talk to high school principals. Maybe you can talk to different people on your campus, maybe certain teachers, maybe heads of departments, and maybe ask people, hey, can you make it extra credit for folks in your class to actually come to our tabling event? Can you make it extra credit for people to register to vote? Are there ways in which you can make it mandatory so people are interacting with y'all in a way where they can register as well as get the information necessary, right? And so talking to people who I like, thank you, Joyce, for the suggestion, right? Talking to people who have students in government classes, people in legal classes, maybe there's an African American studies class that you know that people have that they can also talk to folks about that, right? So people who you know will be on the same page with you and have the same values and the same morals as you, where you can encourage them to get the people that they are connected to or the people who come to their class to actually do the registration. So I had a question about what evidence do we need to produce for the voter box? So again, like I said, right, for the voter box, what you want to do is that you want to making sure that you are documenting the people that you are registering to vote, right? And so if you're documenting them in your database, you're having them do pledge cards, right? If you're collecting those pledge cards, we want to see those pledge cards, right? We want to see your database. We want to see your list of people that you have to verify that you are actually getting voter registration done. And so, like I said, in this, I'll pull it up right now. Right, so you see that we have right here, it is our pledge card that you can download real quickly. But this has name, phone number, email, address, all the good information that we need to know if people are actually registered to vote. And so you want to make sure that you are collecting those pledge cards to verify that you have actually registered people and that you've gotten people to pledge, right? And this is really this is going to be very important because when we talk about GOTV and how many people we have pledged to vote, we actually have tangible cards or tangible pledge cards that we can actually refer back to and say, hey, these are the people who have pledged to vote in my city, on my campus, in my state, and we can actually look at this by numbers. So I would say for Joyce, you said that you registered 150 students at two different high schools, and so that's really great, and I want to applaud the effort. I would say in terms of thinking about how do we document those things, right? Is there ways in which you can go back and see if there's like a I'm thinking about like, okay, maybe is there ways that you can get people to do voter pledges and use the pledge cards to make sure that people have actually are also pledging to vote. If there's ways you've already turned in those documents, as I believe, and so I would say if there's a way in which you can get people to pledge to vote as well, and using those pledge numbers to go to get this voter box, right? Because 150, that's a really great number, but we want to make sure that we verify those things as well. And so feel free to email us at the Youth in College at naacpnet.org, and we can even talk in person and strategize about how we can work to do the databasing effort, right? Because there's a lot of people all over the country doing voter registration, but the biggest thing I've been seeing for folks that people haven't been documenting. And I think it's really, like I said before, it's important that we document these things so that we can do voter education properly, so that we can do voter contact properly, and then we can ensure those people those 150 people that you registered to vote actually turn out on November 6th. Are there any other questions? We have about 5 more minutes before we wrap up tonight. I can even go through some of the other documents that we have as well. Any other questions? Well, just real quickly, if you look at some of the documents that we have a document about tabling, right, which tells you how to table properly. You know, where give you some suggestions about some locations. I'll wait till it pulls up a little bit more. There it goes. Some locations to register to vote or to do tabling at. It gives you some guidelines, right? You know, how to be prepared, how to legitimize yourself. It has some commitments. It has a lot of these. This it has actually even some scripts here, so you can actually like use the script to make sure that people are doing tabling appropriately. But feel free to use this resource and give it to other folks that you have in your network. Let me look over the door knocking one real quick. Again, with door knocking, just give it a second to pull up. Right, it tells you how to be prepared, what's necessary to be prepared for door knocking. It tells you how to train your volunteers, make sure that volunteers are ready to go into the different areas in which you're going to be doing canvassing or doing targeted or blind door knocking. And so it gives you that ability to train people. It gives you a sample door knocking script, how to introduce yourself, how to talk about the problem, how to talk about the solution, how to give a proper ask to make sure people actually turn out. And so, again, I want to encourage y'all to use these resources to make sure that these resources are given out to your units, right? I see that there are people here on this webinar, and I appreciate you for being here, but you're one person who represents other folks. And so definitely get other folks connected with these resources. Again, continue to connect folks with these webinars so people are continuing to get more and more information and that people are staying engaged in this process, right? So thank you again for being on this call. I want to see if there's any last questions. How do we determine whether to use paper or digital voter registration forms, right? So thank you, Travis, for that question. I would say in terms of using paper versus digital, right? So in my mind, what I think about is for young people, right? Young people are oftentimes on their phones already. Young people are on Instagram. They check their emails, hopefully, depending on your range of people. But for young people, right, I think giving them ease of access, right? Digital voter registration forms give ease of access for people, right? So people can do digital voter registration forms anywhere they are in the world, right? So they might not necessarily have to be at your event, but you can maybe have like a Twitter town hall, or you can have any kind of like a digital event where you're getting people, as many people to register to vote digitally, right? So that maybe works for young people better. Maybe for people who are more textbook, they need to see the paper, they need to have a pen, they need to actually have, a physical hard copy. For those folks, I would think that making sure you have paper copies is very important, right? And so having both never hurts, but having the digital one allows you to do a lot more and not have to be present. And so I want to encourage the use of the digital voter registration form, but also recognizing that, like, hey, if you're having a tabling event and people are right there and they have some time to actually register in paper, that's totally fine. Maybe they come by your table and they're like, oh, I want to register, but I'm running the class, I'm running late. That'd be a perfect time to be like, that's cool, it's fine. Here's a link. When you're in class or when you have some downtime real quickly, use this link and register to vote, right? And so you're giving people all opportunities to basically register to vote, right? And essentially what you're doing is you're not taking a no, right? Because people will be like, I'm too busy, I have this, I have that, I have to run to the grocery store, I have classes, right? And when you think about students and young people, the number one reason why people say they don't turn out to vote, or the reason why they don't vote, is because they're just too busy, right? They have classes, they have schedule, they have lives, they have other things, right? Oftentimes people say like people don't care. And it's like, no, young people actually care. Is that we're oftentimes just too busy to actually, stop and engage in this process. And so the more opportunity that we give young people to register or to engage in the process, the more opportunity we have to guarantee that people actually turn out to vote on November 6th. All right, it is 10 p.m. And so thank you for joining our webinar tonight. This webinar has been recorded, and so it will be available for further use. Like I said, this presentation will be sent out. You have access to these documents. And so again, thank you for being on this webinar tonight. Please encourage folks to sign up for upcoming webinars and encourage other folks to continue to participate and engage in this process. Because the more people have information, the more we learn, the more that we're able to be more successful, right? And we're at the Youth and College Division, we're very, very invested in making sure that you all have the resources necessary to do the work that is happening on your campus. All right, have a good night.